All right, thank you. That was great. Again, my name is Jack Clark. I'm with the Massachusetts Audubon Society, and I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations, located up on Beacon Hill at the State House. But we're also neighbors and residents of this area, and with our Joppa Flats Wildlife Sanctuary and our esteemed director, Bill Getty, right here. So if you haven't visited Bill or been down to the Joppa Flats Wildlife Sanctuary, head down there. I'm going to make this quick. This is not going to be a long presentation because I think there's going to be real value in the conversation, the question and answer period we have with three of us are going to sit down and answer your questions and have a conversation. But I wanted to inform you as to what the response has been to these big storms and the scenarios and the forecasts. Senator Bruce Tarr put an outside section in the budget, the last budget for the state. In this budget that became law signed by the governor, the Commonwealth established a coastal erosion commission in response particularly to the type of things that we were seeing on Plum Island. And that's a 17-member commission appointed by the governor. There's representatives from some state agencies, from some cities and towns, from Newbury, and I hold the environmental spot on that commission. And we're looking at what is the information available to assist municipalities and communities in Massachusetts in dealing with big storms. So we have an overall charge. We're looking at what's going on at the state level. There's been, and I'll have to say this, there have been numerous commissions, boards, and task forces looking at the issue of big storms in Massachusetts. The first report that I examined was after the blizzard of '78. And those reports have piled up, and still we've been living along the coast. We're in jeopardy. We look at Hurricane Sandy, as Mike showed. Massachusetts has a population of roughly 7 million people. 85% of them live within 50 miles of the coast, and Hurricane Sandy was 1,000 miles wide. So we were very lucky that Hurricane Sandy took a left before instead of moving forward north. So this commission, created by the law, the state budget in 2013, we're looking at existing erosion in Massachusetts, developing strategies. Bob Thaler is on our commission. He spoke to you recently, made a presentation here. He's part of the United States Geological Survey staff out of Woods Hole. So a number of agencies, experts, scientists, and regulators and municipal officials have come together to look at how should we deal with and address these issues. So we're looking at a number of reports that have been filed statewide, nationally, how other states have dealt with this issue. There are a ton of maps and scenarios. We're essentially gathering all the existing data regarding the history of storms and sea level rise and beach changes in Massachusetts, and looking at some projections also. We're looking at, again, costs also. We've been asked to look at what has been the cost to Massachusetts, not only the taxpayers and government, but also to property owners of destructive storms in Massachusetts since the storm of 1978. So that's all been added. We're working with the National Flood Insurance agencies on that. So essentially, we have to characterize the coast, characterize what's going on, what are the projections, look at the data, and come up with a report. And one of the things I've done is looked at this report that was done in 2007 that has 29 recommendations, very few of which have been implemented. So I would say that government hasn't necessarily sat on its hands since 1978 regarding projected sea level rise and storms and that sort of thing, but not much has been done. We haven't changed our rules, we haven't changed our regulations. The only new thing that's happened as a result of a unified Congress coming together 2 years ago was new flood insurance rate maps that I'm sure have impacted a lot of people here tonight. We also had the Coastal Hazards Commission that provided some information we're looking at was done there. Progress on recommendations, there has been some, but certainly not a lot. I'll look down at this last bullet under the Wetlands Protection Act. So here you would have your local conservation commission implement that. There are standards for a variety of values in the Wetlands Protection Act, but there are no standards on building and land subject to coastal storm flowage. And the task force has been appointed by the DEP commissioner to deal with new standards for building and flood areas, but their work isn't going to be complete by the end of the administration, and I don't believe that they'll come up with any kind of new regulations or standards by January 8th when the new administration takes over. Again, some of the recommendations you can see here from the Coastal Hazards Commission, looking at soft standards rather than building seawalls, using sand, beach renourishment, and that sort of thing along the shore. And so we've been looking at some of the best practices from around the coast. Winthrop Shores, Centerville Beach, good examples. And you'll see on these pictures the result of these stone groins along the beach that trap sand and have really been starved. And what happens in the lower picture is sand has been brought in from other areas. If you looked at Winthrop Beach just outside of Boston, that beach with a big seawall, the beach was starved of any sand. So when big waves and storms came, they hit the seawall, they went over the seawall, caused a lot of destruction. It's a state-owned beach. The state renourished that beach last spring, and it's fully functioning coastal beach. As a matter of fact, we have more piping plovers at Revere Beach and Winthrop Beach than we have at Sandy Neck and the National Seashore down on the Cape. So it's been remarkably successful. So we look at the soft structures, dune nourishment. What are the guidelines that we have? The state has guidelines on how to renourish beaches. What are the best practices? Discouraging rock walls. And then we've looked at, in the past, the history of where we had some successful beach nourishment projects. One of the real challenges we have is working with the Army Corps of Engineers. So when the Army Corps of Engineers goes through a dredging project, let's say the Cape Cod Canal or the Corps is in the Merrimack River, we'd like that sand be put right back on the beach. But the federal government continues to tell us that that's too expensive and they dump that beautiful sand offshore. So we have to work harder with our federal government and with our Congress in changing their practices of where dredge material goes, if it's clean and compatible sediment and can be put on the beach. So again, looking at best practices from around the state, we're working with the town of Hull that has some very good building practices and codes in terms of rebuilding along the shoreline and some of their requirements. We look also at relocation of facilities. That has happened in a number of different places. Matter of fact, this middle picture is the Herring Cove Bathhouse down in the Province Lands, the Cape Cod National Seashore, and that building was completed last year. And in the event of movement of the beach, that whole building can be picked up and moved landward in response to changing conditions. Beach grass planting is certainly important. We've seen that happen around the state. These are some of the typical things we see. There's also some funding available from the state and federal government, both post-Hurricane Sandy funds and also what we call green infrastructure. We have great infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our sewage treatment plants, the infrastructure that supports our society. But we also have now what's known as green infrastructure. Nature, beaches, banks, dunes, rivers, wetlands, salt marshes that can serve to assist in storm surge protection. We've also, the state has also provided some grants to a number of communities throughout the coast in terms of getting ready for big storms and changing climate. And also technical assistance from the state agencies and some of the federal agencies is also readily available. I guess one of the things this commission is doing is gathering existing information so that we can make, and the government agencies and the municipalities can make the best decisions. In 2008, the legislature passed the Massachusetts Ocean Management Act. And the Ocean Management Act is sort of like ocean zoning, but only for offshore, out to 3 miles. And one of the things the ocean plan, and the ocean plan, by the way, is 5 years old now, and it's up for renewal. Public hearings are being held around the state. And one of the things the ocean plan does is it's identifying resources offshore where there may be sand available for dredging that's compatible with nearby beaches, whereby that sand could be put on the beach to be used as a buffer or protection areas. And so we're going through all of that now with the Erosion Commission. We've held hearings. We have a draft report. Our second hearing meetings were just held, third hearings rather on October 16th. We need to finish up our work by the end of December, and all this stuff is available on the website. It's quite interesting work in bringing people together, but the time frame we have is not really looking at creating anything new, but looking at all the existing resources we have. On another point, you know, there's two things happening regarding climate change. Mike mentioned adaptation. In Massachusetts, the Commonwealth has done, we think, at least in the environmental community, and the energy community, we think the Commonwealth has done a very good job regarding mitigation. You know, we look at climate change and the two aspects of it. Mitigation, reducing our carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emissions, and with a variety of laws that were passed also in 2008, along with the Oceans Act, we had the Global Warming Solutions Act, Green Communities Act, Green Jobs Act. And so we've done a great job of reducing our carbon footprint and emission reductions in Massachusetts. So mitigation is well on the way to success, although we still have some big goals for the next 50 years or so. But the other side of the climate change equation is the adaptation. That climate change is real, these storms are happening, they'll continue to happen, we will experience heat, big storms, and rising sea level. Well, it's a reality. Irrespective of whether you think it's man-made or natural, we still have to do something about it. And so on the adaptation side, a group of us have got together and we've got a 4-part strategy. With the Global Warming Solutions Act and the present administration, we're continuing to provide advice and work with the administration, the agencies, on what are the best things we can do to live with rising seas and big storms. We've also filed legislation on adaptation. We filed a bill called the Comprehensive Adaptation Management Plan, which passed the Senate and is now in the House of Representatives. This legislation would provide for adaptation management planning or climate change preparedness in Massachusetts, with funding through the regional planning agencies to cities and towns. It would require the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to put together a comprehensive plan with policies on living with climate change and being prepared for these types of storms. So we're pretty confident that eventually this legislation will pass and will move forward. We've also put together a coalition of 35 organizations of business, industry, and environmentalists that are looking at this issue, and we're doing public education and outreach. So there's really 3 things happening, 2 at the state level with the Ocean Advisory Commission and the Erosion Commission, and then at the private nonprofit level where and also with the legislature, we're looking at legislation and policies and plans for dealing with climate change. We would work at the very local level, doing vulnerability assessments of people, gray infrastructure and green infrastructure, and then having a planned to deal with that, and with adequate funding to go along with it. So that's it for my presentation. I'm going to turn it over to our former mayor, and we can have a conversation later.
You guys hear me? Great. Mary Ann Clancy, nice to be here today. Invariably, I go to these events and I wear many different hats. I am a former mayor. I'm also currently the vice president at the Institution for Savings, and we're really happy to have given money to sponsor this, this event tonight. Thank you. My role tonight is as the chair of the Chamber's Legislative Affairs Committee, and I do want to recognize Ann Orman, who's the president of the Chamber right up front, and the chair of the Chamber Board, Kim Goby, who is here tonight. They had two options tonight. There was a Halloween mixer over in Amesbury, and there was this event. They thought this one was scarier, so they came here. So I appreciate that they did that. But before I get into explaining, and Jack said a great segue for me to talk about why this is a really important event for a Legislative Affairs Committee of a Chamber to talk about. Clearly, this is an issue that's going to affect all of our members, and an issue that we will need to gather information about and advocate for our members. But I have one more hat that I want to mention, and it became obvious as we started to talk about this, and that is a family member. My brother and sister-in-law's house was one of the 5 that went into the ocean in 2013 on Plum Island. It was at 31 Annapolis Way. It was a beautiful home. Sharon's family had owned it for over half a century. As a family, we spent many, many summers on that beach and in that house. We would notice and kind of joke about it occasionally that, you know, the kids would go out and play in this beautiful sandy backyard. And then as years went on, that sandy backyard was reduced, and the walk down to the beach would be steeper, and Stephen would build a ladder, and we'd go down there. And Sharon's mom, who sadly passed away last year after owning this beautiful home with her husband and Sharon for years, would say, this happens all the time. You know, it washes away and then it comes back, and it washes away and then it comes back. And that March night, and I get a little emotional about it because it was a huge loss for our entire family, but no more so for Sharon. You know, to watch that happen and to have those signs there, and to have had them advocate on a regular basis, and to meet with Bruce Tarr and, you know, the people on the island that were so fabulous about trying to get together and get something to be done. And then in the end, it didn't work out for them. And it didn't work out for a lot of other families on there. So when we talk about this, you know, we talk about it with the business community, and you'll see when we start to go through this, and I'm going to be quick about it, you know, it's not a huge response that we had from the business community for filling the survey out. It's almost a 6% response rate, which by direct mail is a really good response rate. But it goes to show that unless you can show them, and Mike alluded to this in his comments, unless you can show people that this is real and this is going to affect you, and you need to plan for it now, not even if it's not for yourself, but for your family, you know, for Sharon's kids, my nieces and nephews, who won't have that house to go to and make memories as Sharon did. It is a real thing that's going to happen to this community, and we need to jump up on that. So putting my legislative hat back on. The goal of the survey was really to do 2 things. We talked about what we wanted to do in the survey, and we really wanted to simplify it for the business community. We wanted to ask them 2 questions. You know, what is the impact that rising tide has had on your business? Tell us what that is. And then the second thing is, you know, what preparations have you done in your business? I know as a bank, our trustees were very, very concerned about it after a couple of storms a couple of years ago. We had contingency plans that said that our off-site disaster planning was in a site that was in Massachusetts. Unfortunately, it was a coastal town in Massachusetts. So we changed that in the last year. We moved that inland to a different one because we're already thinking about those kinds of things in our business. And we wanted to know from other businesses, what are you thinking about? How are you planning for that? So the response rate, as I said, was almost 6%, which again, by direct mail standards is really good. And we would like to see that increase as we start to educate them more. 39% of the businesses who answered were located inland. 24%, which was kind of interesting, were located on a waterfront or a coastal location. 12% were located in the business and industrial park, which, as we saw pictures tonight, is greatly affected by what happens with climate. And then 17%, some people were in Market Square, which we know had a lot of issues not only this past summer, but over the last few summers with storms. Downtown, units around town, South End, just miscellaneous. So the question one that we asked them was this. To what degree, if any, do you consider sea level rise and storm surge to be a short-term threat to your business? We purposely, our committee, talked about leaving the term climate change out of the questions. And we did that because, as Mike alluded to as well in his presentation, sometimes climate change is a buzz term that people say, oh, climate change, that doesn't affect me. We wanted to be real and a little bit more specific than climate change. So we wanted to say sea level rise. Well, how does that affect you? A remote threat, 44% of the respondents said this is a remote threat. A major threat, 24%. Okay, so it's a threat to more than 2/3 of the members, and then no threat at all, 27%. We got some work to do with those people. Some of the comments: we're in the industrial park, big sponge. Coastal storms and the resulting erosion can impact the integrity of the barrier island, causing potential breaches and major damages to infrastructure. As we go through some of these comments, you're going to say, someone was really savvy, because one of these comments, I have no idea what it means, so I'm going to ask you guys to help me out with it. Storm damage will impact the overall Newburyport economy and put more pressure on businesses, even if an individual business is not directly impacted. Absolutely true. If Market Square is flooded, do you think that customers are going to come downtown during a storm and shop in the other shops? Absolutely not. If a business is closed, that impacts all of the businesses around it. And at 16 to 22 feet above sea level, only an anomalous storm surge up the estuary would threaten Market and Pleasant Streets. It could happen, but not likely in our lifetime. Okay, interesting comment, interesting side. Some people think it's not a threat. My store floods regularly. As a realtor, the effect the flood zone storm surge has on property insurance is crippling. My company is located on the water. The threat of sea level rise and storm surge is right on my doorstep. I mean, if that's not the black cow, I don't know what it is. Anna Jakes is very specific in what they say. Anna Jakes is not in the flood map, per the FEMA map, but parts of Interstate 95 are and could impact getting medical supplies to the hospital. Perfect example. They're not in a flood zone, they're not in the water, but any kind of storm surge will affect them. Couple more. Working in the industrial park, there is always concern for the effectiveness of the swales to remove rapid rise of water due to heavy storms. Flooding has not ever been an issue due to groundwater, thankfully, but there are concerns with flooding of Scotland Road and other roads in the park. And then finally, if stormwater should rise high enough to come in, this is really scary. If stormwater should rise high enough to come into my business building in the Newburyport Industrial Park, it could mix with dry chemicals to create different forms of contamination. I find that really scary. Okay, so question 2, has sea level rise ever interrupted your ability to conduct business in recent years? Because we know it's about how it affects them. So we really wanted them to tell us, how does it affect you? Will it affect you? 61% said no, but 34% said yes. So 1/3 of businesses have been impacted. A couple of comments. It impacts us when the airport closes. Okay, so that's something that we don't think about. It doesn't come in my store, but if I can't get out to go do business someplace else, that's an impact to my business. Flooded roads and damaged, destroyed homes lead to closing areas on Plum Island. Street level is low and excess water floods my business because street drainage is not sufficient. The flooding of Route 1 impacts the ability of people to use Route 1 to get to meetings. Same thing. May not impact you, but you can't get to where you're going if you need to. Downtown flooding causes safety concerns. While sea level rise hasn't interrupted my business specifically, more frequent and powerful storms have flooded roads and interrupted electrical power to my business for several days, 5 times in the last 7 years. It's a lot. I have had to throw out, and this is a very common, Ann said this when we read this comment, very common downtown. I've had to throw out a lot of merchandise and rugs on the regular basis. When you go down to Market Square and you go outside at Partridge in a Pear Tree, they have their bags of sand there permanently now, all through the summer in case they need them. So question 3, does your business plan address current and future risks associated with sea level rise and severe weather? 63% said no, but a third said yes. So we're getting someplace. We're working with partners to look into creating okay, this is the one I don't understand. A hydrologic model of the area, including sand transport restrictions, salinity, etc. Also, we have been putting in surface elevation tables to measure salt marsh accretion and whether it is keeping up with SLO. This guy's doing it. Whoever's doing this. Anybody in this room? Did anybody say this? Okay, you guys are good, whoever that is. It is a threat to the long-term health of Newburyport Marketplace and noted as such in the plan. This was said a couple of different ways, so we've summarized it in that one comment. People think it's a threat. I have insurance coverage, but I'm worried that it's adequate. That's a basic concern. We've bought a generator, just like Mike, and do our best to minimize our carbon footprint. We have a variety of MOUs with vendors for all types of issues as part of our emergency preparedness on the state level. That's Anna Jakes. And making an effort to address an additional second location to maintain additional revenue production. We have sandbags to place under the doorways. This is as basic as it gets. We have sandbags to place under the doorways and a huge air diaphragm pump to discharge stormwater wherever appropriate. Severe weather on Mother's Day, some years back, flooded our parking lot and prevented vehicles from driving in. This is reactive. That is a reactive concern. They're hoping if they keep pumping the water out, it won't come back. So our final question was, what do you see the role, if any, the Chamber's role in preparedness? Because that's really what we want to know. What can we do to help in this problem? Education, 79%. People want the information. Businesses want information. Advocacy, 45%. As Jack pointed out, there are a lot of things being done at the state, local, and federal level that we as a chamber will take part in to assist our businesses. Other, 18%. Okay, so these are some of the comments about what we can do. Partner with the city to communicate impacts and plans. Help us with funds to assist in flood mitigation. The next one is my favorite. Oh, sorry. A voice for its members. The next one is my favorite. Be a voice for its members. Send us alerts and pizza delivery. And then 2 said no, bro. I love the pizza delivery. Okay. So that's really what our business community in a nutshell has to say about what their role is to be. So thank you.
So we get these nice cushy chairs. We've been standing so long. So I wanted to open up the floor to questions. And who'd like to go first? Yes.
I'm just wondering, most of the people here that have hair left have white or gray hair. What's the plan to educate young people and get them involved? Because by the time this really affects us, we'll be 80. And we won't really do this anymore.
It's part of Storm Surge. I've been taking my horse and pony show around to some classrooms. And I think the elementary school kids and middle school kids are really engaged and really interested. And teachers have been calling me to do this sort of thing, and I gladly do it as a volunteer. I'm going actually out of our service area. I've been invited down to a Framingham school to address 120 fifth graders in 4 different classes about this whole issue. So the teachers out there are very aware of what's going on, and they're really trying to inspire the kids that are in the school systems now, because realistically, somebody who's 20-something now, and I see it kind of all the time because I try out a lot of younger techs in my business, and I hope I find a bright, shiny one, but there are a lot of dull buttons out there. I don't think but there are also people out there that are doing good in that age group too, so I don't want to color the whole generation. But I think, you know, the kids that are growing up now and going through the school system, they're the ones that are going to really start tackling this. There's going to be some traction, and I'm going to do at least my part. And I know we had talked within our group that we were going to try to do more outreach, at least in the Newburyport schools, and explore programs like that.
So one of the things Mass Audubon is doing is that as there are school curricula standards that have to be taught in the public schools, we're working with the Secretary of Education, Maddie Malone, and the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, May Valley Bartlett, and we have them working together to come up with a required school curricula that has part of the standards climate science in the earth science programs. So kids are not learning about global warming or climate change, they're learning about climate science so that they can ask questions, so they'll learn and be educated enough to make the kind of decision they should be as an adult. And we offer at Mass Audubon's wildlife sanctuaries across the state programs for kids and adults for all ages on climate change and global warming and that sort of thing. But the most basic intense work we're doing right now is with the Secretaries of Education and Environment to make sure that climate change is a required lesson in the public schools.
And I would say that I think that I think it comes down to the urgency. I think you have to say, how does it affect me? How does it affect my community? I mean, we have this discussion, we get back to educating kids. You know, when you try to teach kids history, the best way to do it is to walk them through downtown Newburyport and show them history. I think if you want to create some sort of urgency or knowledge, you know, interest in knowledge for young adults, you have to say, you know, and I think one of the things when I go on the website of the Plum Island website, the partnership, it's here's what the beach looked like 10 years ago from an aerial view. Here's what it looks like now. So we can talk about, you know, we can talk about what's going on in New Jersey, we can talk about what's going on in foreign countries, show them literally the house that went into the ocean, show them what the beach was like when their mother and father went there, but what it looks like now. And why is that? It's because of this. Because I think that's kids can relate to that, and I think adults can relate to that, and clearly the business community can relate to that, because those are the people who answered the poll. So I think I think it's what's in it for me kind of a thing.
Gentleman back there.
I want to address the fact that those houses that we reminisce about, that grandparents owned and whatnot, they were one-story buildings that were not climate controlled, and they usually had heating, and now they go up to three-story monsters that are air conditioned, isn't that the problem that's causing the fall into the water? They use probably 10 times the energy that the original structure might have used back in the days when it was built by a bunch of guys. Still about it.
I'll only speak to the house that I talked about that we went in. It was the same house that was built 50 years ago. So that one wasn't built up or done anything with. It wasn't on pilings either. So, yeah.
I mean, my research on Plum Island, showed that, that whole section of the beach, because 1,000 of those homes are essentially located within what used to be the river mouth.
Right.
So the east-facing part of the basin, that whole part, all the way up north, that used to be river mouth, and that's where the river wants to do this. Putting those jetties on the end, put it in one place, but the ocean pounds on those jetties, they fall into disrepair, the sand flows back into the river, the beach grows narrow, a few homes fall in, and this happens every 30 years. That's how long it takes the ocean to pound that jetty down. And in that 30-year time frame, homes change hands, new homes get built. Whoever owned the home before when it fell in the last time is gone, and the new person says, this is the first time this has ever happened. But if you go back through history, you see that there's this pattern between the integrity of the jetty and the shoreline. And that shoreline is vulnerable just because of where it was developed.
So the Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management Office has what they call shoreline change maps for the entire 1,500 miles of Massachusetts coastline. So you can see where the coast has moved over the last several years, whether it's eroded or accreted. And the most spectacular, we'll call it erosion rates, are around the barrier beaches. As Mike said, the barrier beach is walking backward. So barrier beaches, such as Plum Island, they're spits of sand, and they're created by sand moving down the shore, in this case coming out of the Merrimack River, and they respond to sea level rise by moving. So it's sea level rise, wind, waves, currents, and big storms that move the whole Barrier Beach landward into the salt marsh. And if left alone, they do quite well. But if we build on them, then we have a natural tendency to want to stabilize them and protect them, and that interrupts the whole thing. In my years of working in this area, I was the assistant director for the state's coastal zone management program. And one of the things, as a state regulator on these issues, though we can look at the science, we can look at sea level rise, we can look at projections, and we can look at the geomorphology and all the data on what is happening and what is projected to happen at these areas. But first and foremost, we're also talking about people's homes. And when you talk about someone's home, it's everything they've put into it. It may be a second home, but still it has high value for generations, and it's very, very emotional. And I think anyone involved in this business of talking about sea level rise and storms and all that, first and foremost has to speak at the person-to-person level, because this is a very personal issue. And though there may be disagreements on how we work and live and manage our coastal areas, we also have to recognize the human impact. And it is a very, very emotional impact. I've lived in the middle of it, and it's a very, very tough thing.
The lady in the back.
I'm just curious, I think all of this education is well and good, but what is it that's going to make us change the way we live and act? Because that's a big part of mitigation. And conserve and walk and use less oil, natural gas, and coal. Where's the action?
Yeah, that's why Storm Surge came together. We just kind of felt like, what's going on here? You know, and what we're trying to do is sort of create a need to do this, try to motivate people. And, you know, the educational programs are, I won't say we're sold out by any means, but we have decent crowds. But, you know, when you look at a population of people that live in a community, you know, if you get 100 to 200 people for an event, as a percentage of 15,000 is not very high.
But I'm saying, I mean, we can all say we've been at this event, not ourselves on the back.
Yeah, I mean, we personally need to go home and walk the talk, right?
Exactly.
And that's what we have to do. And even if it's little things and incremental steps, and if you make some of that rub off on your neighbor or your friends, then you start to produce some change. That's the whole problem with social change and why we feel an urgency to educate people, because towns, communities, societies take forever to get anything done. I mean, we just see that happening. And if we're going to address this, we got to start getting going, because it's going to take generations, and it's going to be an ongoing thing. This isn't going to stop at 2100. That's just as far ahead as we're looking right now. But, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, part of the answer is for you to speak with anybody and everybody that can have any impact on any change in your community, state, federal level. You first.
I'm on the Defined Action Committee at church, and I'm keeping
That's
going
right.
on.
You're doing your part.
One of the things that we're doing is we're running a program at Mass Audubon called Make the Switch. So if you're interested in using and purchasing energy from green sources, we can help you figure out how to do that through one of our programs. And so,
We are trying to walk the talk.
yep, so we can actually help with that. And I think also talking to your state senator, your state representative about continuing to push the next administration to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The transportation sector is going to be, as we saw, it's almost a third of the greenhouse gas emission production. And that's a really tough one, not only in Massachusetts, but nationally. And I think talking to your senator, talking to your representative and saying the administration has to move forward. A lot of the low-hanging fruit has been picked, in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and carbon footprint in Massachusetts. Now we have to make some tough decisions. Where's our energy going to come from? Is it going to be a diversified portfolio of big hydro from Quebec? Is it going to include natural gas and new natural gas pipelines? Is it going to include offshore wind energy? Our nuclear facility that we use in Vermont has been shut down. The 5 coal-fired power plants in Massachusetts are all shutting down. So we've got a huge amount of megawatts of electricity that's being retired, taken offline, and it has to be replaced. Do we go green? Do we go the bridge to the future? Natural gas, which is at a low cost right now. Highly complex issues, but certainly something you should be engaged in and pushing your elected folks to look at it. I've given up on the Congress, so.
Well, I would say this. I mean, I think it's one of the issues. I think it's a complex issue that you have to boil down to people. I mean, someone hears climate change. You know, one of the comments in the survey was, well, you know, the question was, what can the chamber do, you know, to help? And one of the answers was, well, can the chamber change the weather pattern? People don't know what the simple things that they can do to affect climate change. Climate change, I mean, when people think of climate change, they think of weather patterns. What do I personally, how can I personally have an impact on climate change? They don't know what that is. I mean, and I'll look back to, you know, to years and years and years ago when we talked about littering, and, you know, and it was a simple campaign to get people to not throw paper out the window when you're driving down the street. I think, you know, I can do that. Okay, I could do that. You know, I can't make the landfills go away. I can't do that. But I can stop throwing paper out the window. So I think you have to boil it down for people to say, this, and this can have a positive effect on this huge issue that's impacting our country. You know, yes, you can call your state and local rep, and I can understand that. And passionate people will do that. But for the everyday person, they're not going to do it until you say, you know, do you know that if you did this, if you just used, you know, one less styrofoam cup today, that it will make a difference in this for your kids and grandkids? So I think we have to draw that line for people because they can't draw it for themselves.
Charlie.
Just suggest that next Tuesday you vote no on question 1.
There you go.
And yes on question 2.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Is Erica still here?
No.
So, years ago, Erica came and talked, she's going to talk again next.
Yeah.
She's a scientist with the University of Science. So did you haven't heard her talk? When is it? When's the next one?
November 19th?
November 19th?
Right.
She's great, and I would love to hear her react to this. And so I encourage everybody to come to that and see what her thoughts are, what the scientists are on the ground are thinking about it. Is it too rosy a picture? Is it not rosy enough? What's her feeling about the likelihood of the storm?
And they've provided some terrific models and projections for New England on big storms and sea level rise. So they are the credible authority as far as the science is concerned from this area. So yeah, have her do that, show that information.
I think we can just take one more question. Gentleman in the white.
I'd like to add something to this gentleman here. My family's been on Plum Island since the 50s.
Yep.
And I've been down there since the 80s. The damage on Plum Island is not unpredictable. Even before climate change, the carrier pieces move inland.
Right.
And the development that's going on now there, okay, is part of the reason why it's gotten worse. And that was predicted, and that by everyone that was against the sewer system out there that allowed the building to go on. And if you look at, you go back and you look at what coastal zone management said, who has no power and no teeth to do anything about it, that advised against it to limit the amount of building that went on out there. It hasn't been enforced. And everything that was done recently to save those houses and I can't blame people trying to save their houses, was wrong. It was against the law, what was allowed to go on. That includes beach scraping, building stone walls. So this was very recently. And I might add that all those houses in those same locations went in the 60s and 70s. And they were built again, right in the same places. And it wasn't just down there, it was up at our end of the beach too. And at that time, when there wasn't any place people could move their houses back, because they were little cottages, and they could be moved on lots that were empty, that are no longer empty, they're being built on, way above what everybody ever predicted.
I think Jack can probably speak to that because there was that report back in the 70s after the storm of 78 where some recommendations were made, and you're right, the recommendations just weren't followed. And, you know, so where does that come from? I mean, the towns, you know, politics is a difficult thing to watch.
And money.
Yeah, you know, a town hates it when a lawyer comes in looking for a building permit for his client because, you know, they're going to strong-arm the town, and the town isn't prepared to, you know, take something to task. Yeah, you can look at Plum Island. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, you know, when we renovated our house, we worked within the rules, and the only variance we had to get was that we had to get a stairway to go out of the house, and that was going to increase our footprint because we raised the house up. But our peak limit was 30 feet or 33 feet, so I purposely put it about a foot underneath so there'd be no question. I go out there now, and I see houses that from the outside look like they got 3 or 4 floors on them, and there's one peak up here at 50 feet, another one at 25, and they average them all out, and it comes out to 30. Well, it's still a 50-foot peak. But I mean, this is the kind of nonsense that goes on, and it's not right, and I agree with you. And I think the folly in all of this is the history on Plum Island, where, you know, there's a record of houses going in bouts of erosion, and building permits being reissued as soon as the sand comes back in, and we just repeat the cycle.
And there's essentially, you mentioned, there's essentially 3 options when you're on a Barry Beach and you're faced with severe erosion and sea level rise. Do nothing, build a wall, or use sand, or build some sort of protection, or retreat. After the storm of 78, Senator Nick Costello filed a bill to purchase properties repeatedly and substantially damaged by storms, and then by willing sellers, homeowners that wanted to get out. The Commonwealth, in working with the municipality, would buy them and use them for conservation and recreation, really just to provide a clean beach. And so that has been resurrected and was passed by the Senate. So we've refiled this bill from 1980. That's now relevant again because Nick Costello said, this is what we need to do. And we're saying, yeah, I told you so. We need to look even more important now. So that bill is hopefully going to be moving forward.
Excellent.
I think we have to wrap it up, but some of us will be around for questions afterwards.